lot of experience with this.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to day 2, the Beer, Wine, and Spirits Summit. I hope you enjoyed the reception last night. I sure did. Bill Newlands, Constellation, thank you for being here. So Bill, if you don't know, is the president and CEO of Constellation Brands. He has served as, previous to that, as director of Hormel Foods. He joined Constellation in 2015 as EVP, Chief Growth Officer, and in 2016 his role expanded to include leadership of the Wine and Spirits Division. In 2017 he became the company's Chief Operating Officer, and then 2018 became president. Quite a succession and quite a ride. So before we get started, Bill, we've obviously had terrible fires in Los Angeles, and we're in day 6 of this thing, and it's still a conflagration. And are your people there okay? How are your folks in California?
Yeah, fortunately, everybody's safe. Obviously, we had a few people that had to evacuate, but fortunately, given the sad situation, all of our folks are okay.
Okay, good. And we'll have more information tomorrow in Beer Business Daily about some of the things the industry is doing to help those folks out and to give you kind of an update of what's happening on the ground there. So, let's talk about third quarter. How about that? One of the things that I found interesting that you said in your conference call was that the beer's market share of overall CPG expenditures is still there. The problem is that overall spending is down. Is that so? Can you elaborate on that? Is that just a function of a beleaguered consumer?
There was an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal about 2 weeks ago that talked about what consumers were doing at various income levels. And the big call out was particularly people who make less than $50,000 are being extremely careful with their spend. And obviously that's an important component of our business and the overall beer business. But one of the things that I think is key is even though the basket's been a little smaller, the percentage of alcohol beverage spend in that basket has remained the same, which says over time that will get better. Right. That's not a permanent scenario. And I think that's an important one.
Right. I think if you looked at what C-stores have done more recently, that is part and parcel of that, because C-stores were just rocking in 2023, and then it really slowed down in 24, and that seems to be that consumer cohort. So, looking forward, you've got a kind of a beleaguered consumer looking for value. How do you square that with keeping your brands relevant?
Well, for those of you who haven't looked at the numbers today, you might want to do that. I think it tells kind of an interesting story. Everybody gets hung up on what happened yesterday and the day before. I think the important thing as we look at it is how is it going over the long window of time? We've been fortunate to have 59 consecutive quarters of growth. Any CPG company would love to have 59 consecutive quarters of growth. And, I also would say, if you think back 15 years, and you were doing this thing 15 years ago, we were probably an afterthought. We were about 6% share 15 years ago. Today we're over 20. We've picked up about a share point every year. And I think that's an important element of continuing to market to consumers, understanding what they want, and bringing those types of products to the table that create excitement for the category and for us.
I was talking with an analyst at breakfast who said, I think it was oversold. Do you agree that the stock was oversold?
I sure as hell hope so.
Well, the market will be opening here shortly, and we'll see. But it's probably a good buy right now. I'm not a stock picker, so don't take that advice. And one of the things that I think everybody's kind of looking at is what's happening a mile down the road at Mar-a-Lago, and there's a lot of heated rhetoric both on tariffs with Mexico and deportation of illegal alien, undocumented workers.
Sure.
How do you view that vis-a-vis your business?
Well, I think the important part to recognize is our business isn't based on undocumented immigration.
Right.
Look, we have a big component of American citizens who are of Hispanic heritage, and they follow our brands. There's a lot of heritage to those brands, and they're an important part of what we have. But our business was never set up around immigration. That was not the lead of the business. So I think that's an important differentiation to continue to make.
Right. And honestly, I don't know that it would be material, because I don't think there's going to be 6 million deport. That's not even
I think
logistically possible.
I think that's correct.
So, and what about the tariff? Do you think that's bluff, or how would, do you have any contingency plans?
Sure. One of the things, we have a government affairs group that I think is terrific. And we've worked with both administrations. We love to tell a story of the last Trump administration. Our business was up double digits over that 4-year period of time. So we're quite experienced at working with the Trump administration. With that said, certainly tariffs are a bit of a risk, and it's an open-ended question. But certainly we have a lot of contingency plans on the what-ifs. And I think in all likelihood, if that occurs, it's likely to be relatively short in duration, but we'll see. It's an open-ended question.
Do you eat it, or do you pass it along?
Well, it depends. We need to get a good sense of, will it happen, and if so, for what length? And then those decisions will be made.
Right. Because I pointed out to somebody recently that in '91, when the excise tax doubled, Barton and Gambrinus decided to eat the excise tax. Everybody else passed it along, and that was really one of the spark of when Corona really started taking off. But that, times are different now. Somebody asked me if Constellation passed on some of the tariff, would everybody else follow? And I said, well, I hope so. It would be foolish not to, but we're not allowed to talk about that, really. Only I am. You just stay quiet on that.
Right.
So tariffs aside, is there anything else that like a major headwind that you see that maybe we're all missing?
No, I think there's a great opportunity for us as an industry to do something a little different. Let me tell you what I got in mind here. If you think about some of the iconic marketing that's been done historically in this business, tastes great, less filling, Spuds McKenzie. I'll argue, our Modelo ads, the fighter, mark of a fighter. But people don't talk about us anymore. What do we talk about? I mean, how many of you can't tell me how much Geico can save you in 15 minutes, right?
Right.
Or what Allstate, the Mayhem guy, is going to do for you. But when's the last time you ever went to a cocktail party and lean over the person next to you and said, hey, I just moved to Geico? Never. But we need to take back the narrative. We need to make sure that our business and that the beer business is at the forefront of people's minds, and I think we've gotten away from that a little bit.
I totally agree. I mean, I don't know if it's my age or they're targeting me, but I just get pharma commercials. Are you having trouble peeing at night? And I'm like, yes, you have my attention. But I'll tell you a quick anecdote. I was sitting at a bar with my son a few days ago watching a football game, and the Modelo Spirit, with the guy with the sunglasses and the cowboy hat. And the guy sitting next to my son was talking to his friend. He goes, everybody tells me I look like that guy. We're just eavesdropping on this. And he's like, no way, really? He's like, yeah, man, yeah, everybody tells me that. And so I look at him, he looked nothing like that guy. Like, this guy was 30 pounds heavier. Anyway, I just thought it was funny that people relate to that guy, even if they don't,
But your point to that, I think, is really important, which is when I'm sure when you go into a bar and people realize you're around the industry, or any of us around the industry, people want to talk to you about it. Here's my favorite beer, here's my favorite whiskey, here's my, people like to talk about that. They don't want to talk about their insurance.
Right.
But we need to take back the narrative. As an industry, we need to do a better job.
I agree. I think there's a real, there's an opportunity that we've had, Modelo aside, I think there's been a big hole in marketing that people are talking about in this industry in the last few years. I don't think anybody would disagree with me on that. So let's talk about something else. Sorry, my iPad gets screwed up. The wine and spirit side, which I think this is just so rich because y'all were a wine company for so long.
Sure.
And now it's the tail wagging the dog, and really the wine and spirit side is kind of, if you want to call it a drag or whatever. And what are do you just become a pure beer company? What are your plans there?
Well, as you can see, we've made a lot of changes on the wine and spirit side. We have only 10% of the brands at the lower end that we had just 5 years ago. You've recently seen that we sold Svedka, again, playing in a lower end. We'd love to have more and more of our business on that side, just like beer, be at the high end. And that's certainly been our focus, is to have much less at the low end and to really focus our attention at the high end of the business. That's where you have better margin structure, that's better growth profile, better premiumization, just like you see in the beer business.
Right. I mean, it's, I'll leave that alone. But anyway, let's talk about your RTDs, like Fresca Mixed. What do you see as the future of that part of your business?
Well, we often talk about, and I think it's understated, that the Chelada business is another great example of what really is, ready to drink. And when you think about that was nothing 15 years ago, and today it's over 20 million cases. We've added 12 ounce, we've added variety packs, doing the same kinds of things that you see with other RTDs. Or Modelo Aguas Frescas. It brings a little bit of a different capability with the nitro capability in it, brings a different mouthfeel, different consumer. We're very interested in that area, but we think we've got some things that are going to be important players in it.
Right. Because, you guys are one of the few people that still sell a lot of and growing beer-flavored beer that actually is beer.
Sure.
I don't know if you guys have noticed that you can sell beer in this market. But you also have said that because of the beleaguered consumer, that your higher-end beers are soft, Oro, Premier. Do you see that? What do you do about that? Do you increase your marketing, or what's to be done?
We're doing a lot of work on that. Certainly the high-end light component of our industry hasn't been as healthy. And I think some of that is at a time when the consumer's being a little more careful with their spend. There's the whole question of you're going to pay more for less, right? So we've got a number of things that we're working on to bring some more interest to that light sector, high-end light sector, so that we can re-engage consumers. I think we need to do something to bring people back into that sector.
Right. And you guys along those lines did a lot of work on shelf space last year, and with the kind of the Bud Light situation, there was a lot of space up for grabs. But you also said that you're still under space. Do you still believe that?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
I mean, sure, we got double-digit growth profile last year, but when you look at the growth of our brands over time, we're still playing catch-up. There's still a lot of opportunity. And then you think about the Shopper First Shelf initiative that we've done with our Gold Network wholesalers. Retailers that have put that in place have seen an improvement in their overall category, And yes, it's been good for us, but it's been good for the category. So I still think there's a lot of improvement that can be done on shelf, and we certainly think we should get our fair share of that, given the growth profile of the business.
Yeah. That's been a refrain that's been repeated at every Gold Network summit since I've been going to them for 20 years, is that we're underspaced.
Right.
And I'm just wondering when that's going to happen, that your velocity matches your space. Do you think shelf space gains will probably slow down this year, having, because you had that kind of black swan event last year?
Well, I think it'll be more normalized. We would expect to see sort of mid to high single-digit shelf space gains, much in line with what our growth profile looks like.
Right. Okay, and we're halfway through, so if you guys have questions for Bill, please write them down and pass them to the middle, and we'll have somebody pick them up. Let's talk about distribution. So, you made a bunch of changes a few years ago, particularly in California. How do you, when you look out over your distributor network, how do you view it right now? Is it settled, or do you still have changes to make?
I think we're very happy with, our whole perspective is we want to work with people who have the same philosophy as we do, which is investing behind our brands and building them for a great future for everyone involved. And, that can be true no matter where or who they also carry. I mean, some of the question is always about AB houses. If you think about Tampa or you think about Houston, they're great performing houses for us, and they're in the AB network. So, our main interest is to be associated with people who have the same vision that we do.
To what extent do you look at having competing Dos Equis or, in the house? Does that, how do you view that?
I think our main focus is on what we're doing. Obviously, we don't control what other people choose to do.
Yeah.
We're very laser focused on what do we do at a consumer level to make sure we're getting more and more of their time, attention, and dollars.
Right. Because, when you have disparate share across the country. You have really high share, like let's say in California, lower share in other parts, Midwest. Is that a big, is that a driver of, you think, of growth, is growing those markets that have lower share?
Well, if you think about, and you're dead right, the market share we have in Nevada and California is more than twice the average of what we have across the country. That just speaks volumes to the opportunity that's out there. I mean, another one that's an interesting element around that is people ask, well, how far does Modelo have to go? Well, Modelo today is slightly more than 50% Hispanic. Corona is 30% Hispanic. When you think about the delta of those two, it wasn't that long ago, Modelo was 80% Hispanic in its consumption. So there's so much more room for that to continue to grow, even though it's the number one beer by dollars in the country. So we see the kind of shares that we have in California and Nevada as a great opportunity to develop across the country.
Right. Well, what about Corona? It slowed down a little bit last year. How do you see that playing out?
Well, Corona is still very important to us. We're very excited about Sunbrew, which we're bringing out here in a couple of months. Again, I think it appeals to a slightly different audience.
Yeah.
You probably also noted in our announcement last week, the percentage of business that we have in the 21 to 24-year-olds grew substantially last year, which I think is good. It's bringing younger people into our franchises, and I think that's very important. I think something like Corona Sunbrew can continue to do that and will be important. But, Corona is still one of the very most loved brands, and here are the infamous questions. Is still one of the most iconic and loved brands in the country, and it's going to be an important for us going forward. As you know, we spent a lot of extra money in our third quarter against our brands, and Corona reacted very well to that additional spend. So we're going to continue. Was that you or me?
I don't know.
we're going to continue to invest behind Corona going forward.
And, Pacifico, that's kind of a sleeper that's creeping up on us. It's kind of what Modelo was to Corona 5-10 years ago. Pacifico is to Modelo. And you see, and that's another one with really disparate shares.
Yes.
How's that been going?
Pacifico's been absolutely on fire, and it's a phenomenal beer on the West Coast, and it's selectively doing very well around the country. And we're trying to do the same playbook that we did on Modelo, which is put it in places, let it develop, make sure it has holding power on the shelf. But when you think about the growth in, let's say, on-premise, Modelo and Pacifico have been the number 1 and number 2 growth brands in draft. So we're very excited about the potential of Pacifico, and it hits a little bit of a different consumer base. So we're not just trading around within our own business. We're bringing new consumers to the table with Pacifico.
How is it different? Is it younger?
It tends to be younger.
Yeah.
Yes, tends to be younger. A little more outdoorsy. People that spend a lot of time and energy outdoors. And I love the yellow.
Yeah.
It's iconic. It stands out in a shelf or a cold box. I think Pacifico is going to be a real growth driver for us going forward.
Yellow brands have been doing well recently. I don't know if that's a connection, but okay. Well, let's see. Any plans for the cannabis side of the business with Canopy Growth?
Well, as you know, we've gone to exchangeable shares with Canopy, so we're out of that day to day. We don't engage on that on an ongoing basis. That doesn't mean that at some point in time we'll keep our eye on the category, but that's not an area where we're spending much time and attention today.
Right, that makes sense, since it's illegal.
Good point.
So, how are you using machine intelligence in your company, and what is your opinion of AI and machine learning?
I'd say that's going to be an important part of what happens going forward. When you think about digital, I'll use digital as an example. The work that we've done in digital has been spectacular, both on the operations side. It's allowed us to, you've probably all seen, we've done a really nice job on the cost side of our business, which has allowed us to invest even more money on the marketing side. A lot of that's because of the digital work that's been done. And the same thing, even you made the joke about pharma and our ages.
Yeah.
But that's really the wave of the future. You can be very specific of speaking to consumers about what they either may want or need to hear about. And that's an important part of what we are doing. And that's going to be even more important, I think, as time goes forward. The consumer doesn't have time anymore, right? The consumer is just overwhelmed by messaging, and you've got to get messages that resonate and that they want to hear, rather than just flood everybody with noise.
Right. So if I'm like sitting around and my phone hears me say, I'm going to party tonight, does the algorithm go out somewhere and say, you know what, there's a Modelo for $2 off at,
Yeah.
But seriously, the delivery apps seem to be, we have DoorDash here speaking,
Sure.
as well, and I've noted that you guys, I feel like, have been really good compared to competitors on being visible.
Yeah, the front page.
The front page.
You bet.
Right.
That's
and
right.
having the correct picture with the correct package description.
Yes.
You'd be surprised at, you think you're buying a 12-pack, but it looks like a 6-pack, and then the price is an 18-pack. All mixed up. It
Right.
happens all the time. So,
Right.
Kudos to
we've
Malika,
invested
whoever.
a lot of money in that, and so have a lot of our distributors. This again, and to some degree that was a benefit of COVID. A lot of people wanted to order and pick it up, click and collect, whatever it might happen to be. Being on the front page is a very important element. It's not really going outside the system. It's just a different way to buy if you're a consumer.
Right. And what is your opinion of the effect that diet drugs are having on our industry?
You know, there's a lot of debate about that topic. And whether you look at industry data that talks about what people that take GLP drugs actually do and don't do, or you look at the millions of conversations that we internally look at through our research, it's just a non-factor.
No.
You know, not that many people stay on those things for very long. At least 80% of them have no impact relative to consumption with alcohol. There's just not a lot of evidence that that's radically impacting the alcohol beverage business, even though some people are quite sure that it is. You can't prove it by the facts.
It didn't pass the smell test to me when people started talking about it last year, mostly analysts,
Yes.
stock analysts and I think, yeah, amongst your cohort, everybody takes it, you know, but I don't know. Anecdotally, it just doesn't seem like it would have that much of an effect.
There are no facts to support that equation.
Right.
Just
Okay,
none.
good. Because I work on anecdotes and you work on facts, and so I'm glad that they match up this time. So the beer industry is lacking leadership in the discussion of the benefits and risks to health we use to influence the headlines and research. And now we are victims of such. Where is the leadership going to come from? And I think he or she's referring to, just the barrage of New York Times articles talking about how it's going to kill us. We're all going to die from drinking beer.
Well, as you probably saw, as soon as the one article came out, there's alternate articles that talk about, the benefits of moderate consumption of alcohol.
Yep.
So, we're at an interesting point in time, and I think as an industry, we need to talk and recognize about the benefits that can exist and do exist, recognizing, you have to be sensitive that you're not trying to market to underage people or those things of that nature. So I think it's a fair question. As an industry, we need to be proactive, whether it's our industry bodies or whether it's individual companies. I think there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, I feel like August Bush III was really concerned about that. I think everybody, or maybe everybody's heard the story of him going to a congressman, probably the Missouri senator or something, and putting 3 Budweisers on the table and then 3 martinis and said, you drink the martinis and I'll drink the Budweisers. We'll see who's drunker. It was an anti-equivalency argument.
Sure.
And, and also AB led the way in spending a lot of money on not only messaging, but on actual research. So why didn't you buy Duckhorn? We all want to know.
I think it's been pretty clear that our focus on our wine business in particular has been to de-emphasize the lower end of the business. And we're not in the mode of M&A work in the wine and spirits business at this point in time.
Right. The wine business is tough.
Yes, it has been tough, particularly at the low end. The low end, I don't think the wine business has done a good job of bringing people into the category. Again, particularly those people at the lower end of the business. When you talk about moving up the price ladder, it's quite comfortable. You've seen, in our recent quarter, Maomi and Kim Crawford and The Prisoner and, brands up the price ladder doing just fine. But the lower end of the business, whether it be us or the category, has just not performed very well.
Right. Okay. And your ambitions on growing Constellation even more. How do you drive the entire company culture to be the same?
Well, we've got, if you had Sabia stand up over there. He is standing, never mind. We always have that joke internally.
I would never say that, Jim. I would never say that.
All joking aside, look, we talk all the time about the opportunity in front of us is massive. Sure, we have a 20 share. I think that the biggest share that somebody had in our beer category is significantly higher than that number.
Yep.
You look at the awareness of Modelo. For a brand that's the #1 brand by dollars, our awareness level compared to many of our competitors is still pretty low. So, we love to look at where can we go from here, and we probably have a bit of a competitive bunch in the group. So, we're looking forward to getting after it.
All right. And I don't know about this, but is 2025 the year when non-alc spirits really scale up? Is this a non-alc spirits guy? The non-alc spirits really scale up on the demand side. Will you acquire in that space?
Well, obviously we did Corona non-alc last year, and it was terrific. We'll probably, when we add it all up, it'll probably have doubled last year from the first year. Mm-hmm. But I think the key, and it's all joking aside with Jim always used to say, the big problem was the non-alcs never tasted as good as the real thing.
Right.
And I think that's largely been fixed.
Right.
Where you can get a really good tasting non-alc product. So if a consumer wants to have a dry week or a dry day or be the designated driver, great. You can have something you enjoy, or you might intersperse. I'll have an extra, then I'll have a non-alc. But the key is what I just said about the flavor. I'll use wine as the example, so I won't step on anybody's spirits question. It's been wine, non-alc wine really doesn't taste very good. Right. And I don't know that that's ever been solved in the same way that now we have some really good non-alc beers.
Yeah.
So that's a key. If it doesn't have the kind of flavor reward that a consumer wants, they're not going to engage with it.
Right. I think beer, just by its very nature, lends itself to a non-alc version more than, non-alc wine or spirits.
Yeah, that's probably. Well, and to some degree, if you ask consumers, they view, right or wrong, that wine is lower alcohol. It's not necessarily a right answer, but there's a perception of that.
Right, right. Well, thank you so much. Bill Newlands, ladies and gentlemen.
Eric,
I appreciate
pleasure.
you coming. All right.
Yeah,
Thank you. All right.